Hello. Today we're going to be wrapping up our discussions of the New Deal and Great Depression. Today's focus is on some of the agencies that were created by FDR as part of the first New Deal. So this is the first round of legislation that he either inspired or introduced in Congress in 1933. You'll be working to fill in the chart that's been provided to you. For each of the agencies we discussed today, you're going to want to record the full name next to the appropriate acronym, the purpose of the organization, and some general information about it. Just use bullet points for this. Your space is pretty small, so please don't try to use complete sentences to fill in these spaces. And in the far right column, you will be making a determination as to whether you believe the agency in question is an act of relief, reform, or recovery. As you can tell from the instructions at the top of your provided page, an act of relief is just direct help for the unemployed and poor Americans. Reform would be changes that are lasting. They're long-term changes that are intended to ensure that a major financial crisis does not occur again. And acts of recovery are kind of mid-range as far as time goes, like how long they last, but they're intended to bring the economy back to normal functioning levels and help people with economic recovery. So feel free to pause this as we go so you can work at your own pace and not miss anything, but do know there's more information in the audio than there will be necessarily on the slides. Our first batch is the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This was created with the Banking Act of 1933 and is largely in response to bank failures. We've talked about the FDIC before. Their main purpose is to kind of oversee banks and ensure that depositors' accounts are safe. This is the organization that guarantees your deposits up to a certain amount of money to ensure that if people have done the right thing and put their money into the bank, that it'll still be safe for them in case the bank happens to close or go under. And just for interest, the elderly lady you see here in the front is actually the very first recipient of an FDIC payout. She's receiving a check there on July 5th, 1934. She's from Illinois. I believe her check was for probably about $11 or $12, not very much. But given the prior panics and the rushes on the banks, you can imagine the sense of relief that would bring to people or restored confidence it would give them in their bank, as long as the opportunity for recovering their money is present. Tell if things are recording or not. The next organization we'll speak about is the AAA. This has nothing to do with car insurance, which is how we're used to hearing about it. So the modern AAA is not related to the AAA of the New Deal. This is referring to the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. This is part of the first New Deal. It's one of those batch of laws that comes out of 1933. And its primary goal is to balance supply and demand in agricultural production. So if you remember the World War I overproduction of goods, farmers in America were stepping up to fill in the gaps left by European farmers who, during those years of conflict, were not able to produce in the way they had before. We know that the farmers in the United States kept producing at those high levels into the 1920s, and they had ended up producing more goods and more agricultural products than could actually be purchased. I mean, there was not a way for Americans to buy up all the goods that were purchased, and due to tariff policies and international relations, there really wasn't a strong overseas market for these goods either. So in order to, correct that imbalance, FDR and his administration proposed paying farmers to produce less in order to, reduce the supply, right, and hopefully have a balancing effect on agricultural production rates. So in the image you see on the screen, these are farmers waiting in line. They're actually in Texas. They're waiting for their very first AAA checks. For some farmers, this was a really pretty of a good deal. You planted less and really had comparatively less work to do, and you were getting enough money from the government for you to live off of and kind of manage your household. But unfortunately, this also had some sort of controversial side effects as well. For farmers who were engaged in things like hog production, that sounds oddly, for farmers who are dealing with livestock, if they have too much of the livestock, like they're producing too much meat, they would be paid to cull their herds. So in the image you see here, farmers are actually culling some cattle. They're burying them in order to reduce their herd size, right, and reduce the amount of product they were producing. This particular act was not terribly popular, and largely because of this culling or actual destruction of product. People who are living in cities were seeing photographs of perfectly usable meat and produce going to waste when they were having a hard time, affording these products, and here they were literally being thrown away. This is not a long-term sort of act or administration. The Supreme Court actually rules it unconstitutional around 1936, and they decide that the states are more responsible for managing farm production than the federal government. So this is shut down. It's revived in a different form a little later, but it doesn't have the same sort of long-term impact that some of the other agencies we'll look at actually have. Okay. The next agency we need to discuss is the HOLC. That is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Again, part of the first New Deal, 1933. This one was really aimed at helping homeowners who were in arrears in their mortgage repayments. So most of the people who were helped by this relief program are 1 to 2 years behind in paying their mortgages. They're at sort of an immediate risk of losing their homes. This was basically a way for the government to refinance people's home loans. They were lower interest than what most of the banks had been offering. They were at a longer term, giving people time to get caught up and really get back on track in making their payments. Over the course of the corporation's existence, they made about 1 million loans to people in total. I don't know the full value in dollars of those loans, but that's at least 1 million homes, right, we can presume are being impacted by this program. It ends in 1954, largely a slow die-off. People start paying back their mortgages. The HOLC wasn't authorized to continue offering more loans to people. So after they got over that immediate period of fixing people's repayment issues, it goes away. Okay. Next is one of the most popular organizations that's created by the New Deal, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This organization is really highly publicized, and it is really a PR success for the New Deal. It's operating in every state. They're operating in rural areas, and it's really targeting young single men, guys who are part of that massively out-of-work crowd, and they're doing a lot of physical labor, so planting trees, clearing trails in parks, fighting forest fires, receiving some job training for future careers. This one lasts from 1933 to 42, and it provided a way for younger men who maybe aren't at college to have gainful employment and be paid for actually completing work. This is not a handout program. It's something that would really help with people's morale. It makes you feel differently to work for something and earn it than it does to just receive a check every month. Today you can go to park sites, and occasionally you'll still see plaques that say this trail was laid by the Civilian Conservation Corps, or, these are the workers that were employed here. This is a fairly interesting organization in that most of the money that was made by these young men didn't go directly into their pockets. Often CCC workers would go to kind of like a campsite, and they'd all stay together in barracks, and they'd be living away from home. But to ensure that they weren't just producing masses of ranks of young single men with lots of expendable money away from home, the guys who signed up for this program had to agree to send the majority of their income back home to family members. So a lot of them were sending regular paychecks home to their parents or home to grandparents, extended family. It was a way to ensure that a lot of families were getting an income, right? And it also removes the need of feeding another mouth in the home if it's pulling the workers out to go somewhere else. Kind of similar in focus, right, to the CCC is the Works Progress Administration. It's later renamed to be the Work Projects Administration. This one has a slightly wider scope than the CCC. It's not just targeted at young men. This is open for women. It's open for married men, and they even have some African American positions. They have a different division for Native Americans. So this is much more inclusive as far as employment opportunities. Over the course of its existence from 1935 to 1943, it actually employs 8.5 million Americans in various capacities. The WPA has kind of got the interesting quirk that it also employed artists. There were photographers. Dorothea Lange, when she took this photograph, this is a different angle of the migrant mother you've seen so many times. She was working for the WPA and receiving a check from the federal government for touring out through the Dust Bowl-stricken areas and documenting things as a photographer. There were mural artists who were employed. They just did public art projects, really brightening up cities and receiving income. There were traveling historians who went around and interviewed people about their experiences. There were all kinds of things being produced by the WPA. In addition to their arts programs, they had the more general public works things, building roads, building national park sites, public buildings. They were doing all of those sorts of things. The WPA, the CCC, and the one we're about to talk about, the National Youth Administration, all end around the start of the United States' involvement in World War II. The push for the draft and mobilization for the war effort kind of made these programs unnecessary. But just like the CCC, being able to receive money for work instead of just a handout was really good for people's morale. Just like today, people don't always want to just take a check to sit at home, right? That can be really damaging to someone's self-esteem. So accepting work for legitimate pay made people feel better, and they mostly approved of this effort of the New Deal. It's really not challenged extensively. The only critics of it would be people like Hoover, who would say that if this puts the federal government in the position of creating jobs, it puts the federal government in competition with American entrepreneurs who would create jobs through, creating businesses or employing their fellow countrymen. Right. So our next one, the NYA, the National Youth Administration, again, very closely related to the WPA and CCC. This is targeted at younger Americans. So around age 16 to 25, both males and females could participate in this. A lot of what the NYA, a lot of what they offered were work-study programs, so students who were in college and maybe needed some part-time employment where they could still go to school. This would provide opportunities for that. Like the poster here indicates, there are some classes offered for work training. So younger individuals would be, instead of actively looking for a job and competing with adults, they'd be receiving training to make them more marketable in the future. And this really did have a strong impact on preparing Americans for the future job market, particularly after World War II. There's arguably an impact of the NYA because there are, a generation of young workers who have job skills they can immediately apply to the post-war economic boom without student loans to repay. The next we will speak about the Tennessee Valley Authority. This is created in 1933, but it still exists into the present. You can see on the map there the yellowy orange color is the current service area of the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's really a series of hydroelectric dams. I think there's about 29 or 30 of them. They provide low-cost electricity and flood control jobs. They make it easier to navigate some of the rivers on which the dams were built. And it was really just a method to bring positive change and modernization to a really rural area of the country. It was expensive to bring in electricity, especially for somewhere that's not highly urban and densely populated. And in the 1930s, Tennessee certainly was not very urban or densely populated. This provided a method of modernization and economic growth for the impacted areas of Tennessee. And in fact, today and throughout the 20th century, the TVA has actually provided a model for the United States as they're going overseas to help other countries modernize, providing economic relief or just guidance and how less economically advanced areas can grow. The TVA has proven a model for how to go about doing that and do it effectively. We have two more to speak about. The Securities and Exchange Commission is another one that has lasted to the present. This organization exists to monitor the stock market and protect investors. It was really just an immediate reaction to the stock market crash in 1929. There was a clear need for a method of protecting investors who put their money into the market and for overseeing the exchanges that were taking place to make sure there weren't any sort of dirty dealings or questionable stocks being sold to people. This does still exist today. They will charge people if they're doing crooked dealings. You can get some pretty hefty fines or jail time if you are behaving inappropriately in stock trading. But again, this is just a fail-safe sort of measure to ensure that future problems don't occur, and it's arguably fairly effective. I mean, we've had some economic downturns, but we've not had a major stock market just crash where the bottom fell out like we did in 1929. The last organization we need to discuss is the Social Security Administration. Those of you who have started working, you know that you pay into Social Security. This is established in 1935. It is still a thing. We usually kind of associate it with old age benefits, so people who are 65 and older. I think they've not changed the age range. People who are of an age to retire can receive a check in the mail. Right? So basically the idea is that you pay into this fund while you're young, and as you are older and you retire, you start to get payments so that you can live without working. You've paid your dues, it's your time to retire. The added benefit to this is it removed older workers from the payrolls, and especially during the 30s when it was difficult to find employment, the fewer older people and the fewer younger people who are actively competing for jobs would make it easier for folks in their peak working years to have access to the jobs that they needed. There's an image of the Social Security card here. I'm going to assume that most of you do have a Social Security card with a Social Security number, that thing you have to have when you go to take the ACT and fill out all of your paperwork. They're assigned based on where you live. There's a regional aspect to what your number is and how you've ended up with it. And just for the sake of fun fact, the lowest Social Security number, the one of the earliest ones given, and it was actually 001010001 was the number, was given to a lady who lived in New Hampshire. It was one of the further northeastern states, not Maine. I don't know why they didn't pick Maine as state number 1. Just kind of a luck of the draw. This lady named Grace P. Owen ended up being the very first person in New Hampshire to get her Social Security card and fill out the paperwork, so she received the lowest Social Security number. Just an interesting side note to history. Once you have your chart completely filled out, please make sure you cut it out neatly and glue it in your interactive notebook on page 52. Once you are finished with that, revisit the original instructions page and complete the work you need on page 53. I'll see you guys on Monday.